Kate Mila, welcome to Irishgrannyhelen. Um, this video is going to be a continuation of a philosophical video I made the other day. I recorded some information that I had read about Stoicism. So back up for a second. I get a lot of questions all the time from people. What can we do? What are some coping mechanisms? How should we look at the world as it is? And I don't know. I don't have all the answers. Like everybody else here, I am on a voyage of discovery to find out what it's all about. And it takes me down some really interesting roads. I had a misconception about Stoicism. A word you hear all the time. Oh, he's so stoic. He doesn't cry when he's upset. Implying that a stoic is a person who shows no emotion. That's really not true, as we found out. If you haven't watched my earlier video on Stoicism, you might find it interesting. And correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm learning about this too. And I'm trying to understand what I'm reading, and that's, always a challenge. So it's my understanding that Stoicism is about learning to cope with your emotions, not deny them, acknowledge them. They're a normal part of being in the material, physical world. They're part of being human. But not to dwell in your emotions. Do not be ruled by your emotions. So acknowledge them and experience them, but don't let them run your life. And we're going to get into a little bit more about that here in a moment. I'm trying to think of the other things that we learned about Stoicism. It's not about being masochistic and suffering silently in pain. It's about learning to acknowledge that which matters. The acceptance that you're not your body, the acceptance that there is more. And for the time period in which Stoicism was first put forward as a philosophy, many people did not think in those terms. And it was, some people did, don't get me wrong, but it was a challenge for people to consider that yes, we die, and yet we don't die. That was a huge challenge for people. We'll get into more of these ideas later, and to other different philosophies of life later. But I thought it would be interesting to look at. Actually, I was kind of led to this, to look at how Stoicism regards grief. And part of this is personal grief, and part of it is public grief. Grief for how you thought the world was, what you thought your life was going to be, what your expectations were of your leaders and your country, what you supposed your last years would be like, how you thought your relationships would unfold, all those expectations. And when things don't happen the way we expect them to happen, we experience a form of grief. And of course, then there's also, when we think of grief, we think of sorrow that somebody has died, or usually that's what grief means to most people on the surface at first glance. So let's talk about this. Now, I'm not saying that Stoicism is what you should believe. I don't know. What I'm saying is this is what Stoicism puts forward as the best way to deal with being a human being. And I think it's very interesting. What I find most interesting about Stoicism is its nexus with other philosophies that are actually embraced more in our time. For example, Buddhism, very similar in many ways. So let's just read what I read. And this is from several different websites on the internet, the Daily Stoic. Uh, you can go on the internet, type in Stoicism, and all sorts of stuff comes out. And I just went where I was led. As I told you, I felt like I was led by this. I won't go into it, but uh, this is important, I guess, for us to consider. So Stoicism, thoughts of Stoicism on grief, both personal and public. So Stoic would define grief as an excessive attachment to external things, that it is harmful to get focused on anything that is beyond our control. And the caveat is we all experience grief. We all experience loss, and we miss what we lose and feel sorrow. And that is what grief is all about. That's a normal human condition. And Stoicism does not deny the normalcy of human emotion. What it purports to do is to encourage people to not be ruled by their emotions. So let's move forward. So we grieve, and we grieve people that we lose. We grieve personal loss of any kind, a pet, a job, a loved one, health, opportunities we had hoped for, social and political situations. So the important thing is according to Stoicism, is not to dwell forever on your grief. And we'll talk a little more about that. This is not about denial of your emotions. The important thing overall is to be grateful for what you had, to accept that which you love, whatever or whomever, is a temporary loan from fortune. The Stoics had a favorite saying that they would use to remind themselves all the time. And in Latin, the saying is memento mori, which is remember you must die. And this brings to mind, whenever I hear it, this brings to mind my childhood as a little Catholic girl. And every year, beginning of Lent was Ash Wednesday. And on Ash Wednesday, for anyone who might not know, you might not have been raised a Catholic, or you might not have encountered Catholic friends, and maybe you wondered why they had the dirt on their face once a year minimum. So on Ash Wednesday, we would go to church, and we would approach the altar and kneel in front of the priest. And the priest would have a little dish of ashes, which, by the way, where do those ashes come from? The palm leaves from Palm Sunday are burned for the ashes. So the priest would put his thumb, it's always a him, put his thumb in the ash and then make a sign of a cross in the center of your forehead. Interesting spot, don't you think? Your third eye. I just always thought that was interesting. And while he is making the sign of the cross, he says in Latin, remember, man, that even if you're not a man, remember, man, that thou art dust, and unto dust you shall return. And so this Stoic notion of always keeping in the forefront of your mind that we are finite beings is actually also a very important thing in the eyes of the Catholic Church to remember. So important, they dedicate a day and a ritual to it every year. Lent is supposed to be spent in contemplation of that. So, and the denial of, offering things up for Lent, that's that detachment from the physical world. There are other reasons too, Jesus, the crucifixion, but there's a huge element in this ritual, in this practice of Catholicism, and I think some other Christian churches. This is the moment to accept your mortality and to try to loosen your attachment to things of the flesh. The Stoics wanted us to remember that our time on earth is limited and we are not our bodies. Very important belief system there. They believe that we should put our focus on our true selves, on how to be a good soul, how to be an honorable person, and not be distracted and all about diversions and playtime. So this is their advice. Now, this is what the Stoics believed. This is not me giving anybody advice. This is what they believed we ought to be doing in the best of all Stoic worlds. That when you feel grief, you should sit with it and experience it. Don't try to cheer people up who are in grief. Allow them to grieve. They need to move through the process of grief. They need to feel it and experience it and accept it, to recognize where it comes from, process it, digest it, and then you can move on. The Stoics advised, take that grief and use it productively. Now, we see this all the time. Many people use their grief productively. I can think of people that I know personally, but I'm not going to talk about them. I'll use a larger example. The parents of the children who died at Sandy Hook, they formed a group called Sandy Hook Promise, and they became activists from their grief. It gave them a sense of purpose, that this loss was not for nothing. So a Stoic would tell you that we humans have entered the kingdom of fortune, whose rule is harsh and unconquerable, and at her whim, we will endure sufferings, both deserved and undeserved. So I did a little research and looked up Fortuna. This is the goddess of fortune in the Roman pantheon. The Greeks have an equivalent. Always depicted as a woman, fortune. Now, try to remove yourself from our definition of fortune and think about what they believed. They believed that this was the goddess of fortune, the goddess of chance and lot, like placing lots, gambling, it's chance and luck. And she was associated with fertility, with bounty of the soil, and fruitfulness of women. And she was the giver of abundance, but also the controller of destinies. She's usually shown blindfolded. This is going to sound really familiar. She's usually shown blindfolded. She's shown often standing on the Rota Fortunae, the ball of fortune, because to balance, you're never really always in one place or another. You're trying to balance on this ball, and it's capricious and unpredictable, and it goes in any direction. That's luck. That's fortune. It depicts the uncertainty of fortune. And she's often shown holding a cornucopia, a horn of plenty, like the Thanksgiving thing with all the fruit falling out of it. That's the cornucopia, which is the horn of plenty in Latin. And it means, it's a symbol of a good harvest. Abundance would be the good word. She can also be shown holding, and I thought this was a great word, a gubernaculum, or a gubernaculum, I guess. I guess it would depend. And yes, guber as in gubernatorial, as in governor. That's where we get the name governor. And where does the name governor come from? Guber. It comes from the word for rudder. Rudder in a boat, steering a boat. So that was the job of the governor, was to steer the ship of state. And this goddess Fortuna is shown holding a rudder because she's controlling the direction of life. And she looks very much like the modern depiction of justice. She's blindfolded, she's holding things. She is the personification of luck. And very famous saying in Latin, fortuna caeca est, luck is blind. And now we say justice is blind. So you see the equivalency there. She's the goddess of fate and life's capriciousness. And i.e., that is the suffering that we experience, both deserved and undeserved. Life is capricious. So Stoicism advocated that we face our emotions, that we process our emotions, and that we deal with our emotions. If you feel jealousy, you don't stuff it down. If you're angry, you don't explode. You don't be governed, directed, steered by your emotions. You acknowledge it and you analyze it and you try to come to some sort of understanding of it. But their advice, and I thought this was really important because a lot of people right now are in a state of denial or wanting to turn away. And the Stoics believe that you cannot run from your emotions, that all you're doing is delaying the inevitable. Do not run from your emotions. It's better to focus on your grief, your loss, face it head on, process it now, understand what it is for now, and work on it. Don't ignore it. Don't bury it. Don't deny it. And this is their advice. Sit in your pain and accept it. I guess that's where we get the notion that Stoics don't feel pain. Yes, they do. They just don't run from it. So the first part of this was a little bit more about personal loss and personal grief. And the rest of this is about all types of loss, including public loss. And fear too. You can put any emotion into this category. So this is what advice for your life the Stoics would give. Look for the positives in life. Now, they don't mean be Pollyanna. They mean sit down with a clear eye and look for, acknowledging the loss, the grief, the anger, or the whatever. But what else is there? Ask yourself, was this experience, this loss, this emotion, was it for nothing? What was its purpose? Was nothing accomplished? Was something accomplished? What was it? Remember, the past doesn't change. And this is really interesting. Their view of the past is, it's like a foundation of their lives. The past doesn't change. It's happened and it cannot be changed. It's immutable. The past is always ours. You always have the past. I'm reminded of the movie Casablanca. We'll always have Paris. That's a Stoic belief. Your past cannot be taken away from you. There is nothing more secure for us than that which has been. So their advice is to cherish your memories, to look back with gratitude, to say to yourself, we were lucky to have what we had, to experience what we experienced, to love whom we loved. We were lucky, and these are the beautiful things about it, the good things about it. It was not for nothing. Our duty is not to complain about what's been taken away. Now, remember, they're not saying never do that. They're saying, okay, but don't wallow in it forever. You have to go through that, and you have to process it. You have to experience it, and you're going to say things, and you're going to crawl into bed and put the covers over your head. You just can't do it forever. So our duty is to not to complain about what's been taken away, but to be thankful for what we have been given, even if it's transitory, because guess what? All things are transitory. All things will pass. And it's so important. I loved this sentence because I didn't expect it. The Stoics remind us we are not alone. We are all in this together. The Stoics were very much into plasma physics, whether they knew it or not. So we're all equally distant from virtue. Now, this is where it gets kind of a more public sort of emotional attitude. Anytime you start a sentence with those people, hold on. Epictetus, the great slave and philosopher of Stoicism, wrote, ask yourself, could it be that it's not us versus them, but that I am one of those people? You cannot help but see the misdeeds of others. That's a human characteristic, as we judge. It's just hard not to. But rather than judge, remind yourself that their misdeeds come from ignorance. Everyone goes, oh, wait a minute, they went to Yale. Okay, they talk about that. Even when somebody is intelligent, even when someone knows 100% that what he or she is doing is wrong or unjust, even when they continue to do evil, an evil that they're fully aware of and recognize, even then it's ignorance, because it's based on their belief that it's good for them. They're not thinking of their eternal soul, of their spirit. They're only thinking in material terms. Big mistake. Ask yourself, what perception of good or evil led them to commit such a wrong? And then, this is the hardest thing that I read, and I will share that with you. They said they believe that there is no such thing as pure malice. And I wrote down here that I would say that this is very hard to accept, but this is a Stoic belief. So we'll sit with that for a while and think about that. There are only mistaken judgments about what is good or what is bad, an ignorance of right and wrong. And even when it's apparent that what somebody is doing is really an egregious wrong, and they recognize that it's considered an egregious wrong, they do it because they feel there's something in it for them. And that's the ignorance. Because bad deeds, bad karma, and the Stoics don't mention that, but I just thought I'd add that. So try to have a sort of doctor-patient relationship, they said, with people who do wrong. Look at them. Recognize what's wrong with them. Wish them well. And then support their recovery from their error. That's a big question mark there. I don't know how you do that, but this is their advice. Remember that we're all patients. We're all prone to be wrong and to fall for irrational beliefs. We are not sages. So I just thought this was so interesting, and I'm going to continue to pursue this belief system and share it with you until we get sick of it. People seem to really respond to this, so I'm happy to do it, and I will continue to do it. In the meantime, check your subscriptions. Things are hinky over there in YouTube land. Oh, I'm on probation again. I can't even talk about it. I will talk about it on my Substack. So you may see me tiptoeing around even more. This is when I'm being careful. I'm on probation. So consider joining, become a friend. I'm paying people to be my friend, charging people to be my friend. So consider joining Friends of Irish Granny Friends, and it's only 99 cents. So it's just to provide a little bit of pseudo anonymity. And if you have questions about life or Ask Your Irish Granny on Substack, I invite you to email me. My email is irishgrannyhelen@gmail.com. And so thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. I appreciate all of you who have stuck around. You're the best. Thank you so much. And slán go fóill. Sláinte.